This is All India Radio. In the program Insights, now we bring you a discussion on Gandhinagar Declaration, Outcome of India-Africa Defence Dialogue. The participants are Sheelkant Sharma, former diplomat, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, journalist.
The India-Africa Defence Dialogue took place on Tuesday on the sidelines of the Defence Expo in Gandhinagar in Gujarat, basically to explore ways to strengthen the India-Africa defence relations. A Gandhinagar Declaration was adopted to enhance cooperation in the fields of training and military exercises. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, in his address at the dialogue, invited African nations to explore Indian defence equipment and technologies, saying the robust Indian defence manufacturing ecosystem can fulfill international requirements. How do you see India holding this conference with African continent, Mr. Sharma?
They seem to have developed now a new outlook towards India-Africa cooperation. In this new outlook, defense dialogue is actually a mark of that activism, are building up on the close bond that has persisted between India and Africa through the years of the struggle against colonialism, which is what was mentioned by Raksha Mantri in his statement. And now India is poised to grow in the defense production, as was mentioned by our Raksha Mantri, that our defense production can go up to something like $22 billion. And the Prime Minister has set a goal of $5 billion of defense exports. So, in that overall context, this defense dialogue takes place, and the mutual defense-related concerns, maritime security, counter-terrorism, cyber-terrorism, cyber security, and Prime Minister mentioned in his speech to the Parliament in Uganda 2 years back. They also described the areas of cooperation-based trade and development to grow technology, to grow between the cooperation between two India and Africa, and to have a free Indian Ocean region for trade and secure region, because India and Africa are also part of a number of larger groupings, the Indian Ocean region grouping. And also India has very good bilateral relations with many African countries. Then India, South Africa, Brazil, we are part of the group. We are also part of the BRICS group. And there is this Commonwealth grouping, which also covers important African countries. So we relate with Africa through a number of bilateral, multilateral forums. And the emphasis was given by PM also on the UN, for instance, how India and Africa cooperate in the UN and how we have a similar view of the UN system and the need for reform there, and to make the UN more effective by getting the necessary reforms. And one of these is, of course, the reform of the Security Council, where Africa and India both need permanent membership. Africa representation for permanent membership and India for permanent membership, along with Germany, Japan, and Brazil. So these are, there is a larger perspective, there is a regional perspective, and there is a bilateral active perspective. All these fuse together in the defense dialogue. And 20 defense ministers came for this meeting, and 8 permanent secretaries of defense, and a number of companies, and our own companies which are involved in defense production. Their number is also growing, as was mentioned yesterday. There are 101 defense production related companies. So this whole exercise is goal-oriented, is strategic in nature. And one important point of this dialogue is that India does not believe in a hierarchical world order. Our relationship with Africa has always been among sovereign equals on the basis of common perceptions of mutual interest, and in areas which are commonly agreed to be of interest and for mutual benefit. So partnership, which has been long-standing, and India doesn't try to consider a partnership which is skewed in favor of India, or which is one-sided. It is not like that. And India is treated as such. African nations consider India. It has been over the last several decades that India is one of them, and this is reflected in their approach, their understanding, and their confidence in the Indian setup.
This is a very valid point, actually. Explained it very extensively. So, in fact, there has been a concerted effort by India to expand its overall relations with the African continent. There have been significant number of two-way visits to the African countries in the last few years. And we have also increased our developmental assistance to Africa. So according to official data, India extended concessional loans of over USD 12.3 billion to Africa and completed around 197 projects so far. And India's bilateral trade with Africa has reached USD 89.5 billion in 2021-22 compared to USD 56 billion previous year. These are staggering figures. So these massive outreach to the African continent in the context of the current geopolitical turmoil, how do you see it also in the context of China's growing efforts to increase its influence over the African continent? Do you see some kind of competition between India and China in Africa? Or how do you see India's overall approach to build people-to-people relations and help Africa actually stand on its own feet, unlike China, which has been trying to, expand its influence in a different way? So how do you see the massive efforts by India to ramp up cooperation in diverse sectors, including in defense and security, with the African continent?
Our space for cooperation and space for India in the hearts of the African nations is very different. As I mentioned earlier, India is not up to its ulterior motive. India is not up to driving strategic gain at the expense of the Africans, say as China has been doing by creating bases. For instance, in Djibouti, they are now virtually creating a base. So as part of their ambition to rule the waves, as it were, and to emerge as a number one superpower, we don't have any such, ulterior motives. India's whole purpose is, as Prime Minister's Sagar scheme mentioned, security and growth for all in the region. Now that is part of our ethos also. So we reach out to a different space and we build upon what we have so far achieved. The trade volumes that you are mentioning, they are born out of mutual genuine interest, the mutual compatibility. Our efforts to give training to African nations for the last half century have borne fruit. We have been training them for a long time under the ITEC program. Now, even the defense dialogue, for instance, there is offer of fellowships for the defense personnel under the auspices of the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. So there is this, and then, we have in the NDC African military personnel who come at a senior level, and our defense establishments are always open to cooperation with African countries. This trade volume which you mentioned is also reflective of India's self-confidence. India is today much more self-confident and about standing on its feet. And our whole philosophy is that the results of cooperation are not geared to create dependence, but to create a bond of solidarity and brotherhood and equality, and which the African nations appreciate. So the offer of training and equipment and the multiple dimensions of defense and security, which figure in our defense dialogue and the Gandhinagar Declaration, they actually bear out this whole basic approach that India has followed, which inspires confidence in the building up of relationship. We don't aim to, give them, to bind them in debt and in return thereof try to secure strategic interest. Our strategic interest in Africa is mutual progress, is development. And this follows, well-grounded philosophy that progress of all, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, that is extended the cooperation with everyone and development of everyone. That will actually automatically create a bond. So with Africa, this is bearing fruit, and you will see more and more of this in the coming years and decades. The visits of the African leaders to India and PM's own visits and our Raksha Mantri's visit and the Minister of External Affairs' visit to African countries these are reflective of the bond which is growing. So, and the participation, this very rich participation in the Defense Expo, the second Defense Expo in Gandhinagar, and have dialogue, defense dialogue every 2 years, are to keep the momentum going and to identify new areas, to monitor progress in areas agreed, and to forge a relationship which strengthens the mutual cooperation. And our security concerns are terrorism, maritime security, and the threat to our development perspectives of our development plans. And in that respect, we see the advancements in the maritime region, which joins, which connects India and Africa, of concern. And we would like to go by respect for international law and rules-based behavior. And we feel that all this can be secured by the UN system through reforms, and a UN system which is based on the Charter, where sovereignty is respected and the territorial integrity is respected. So they have value for us, and African nations also share this. They might be under stress for myriad problems, but still they are conscious of their own rights and sovereignty and their freedom, and India respects that. So there is a lot we have stood for, and which is common in our destiny, as with India and Africa.
Mr. Sama, the Gandhinagar Declaration proposed to enhance cooperation in the field of training in all areas of mutual interest by increasing training slots and deputation of training teams to India from Africa, empowerment of capability building of defense forces of Africa, and participation in exercises and humanitarian assistance. So how do you see the overall approach of the declaration, and do you think in fact there are timelines for achieving these targets, or how do you see about the specific goals that in fact the declaration mentioned?
Well, this is part of India's overall aim to strengthen Africa's desire to stand on its own feet. So training of personnel is a very important component of self-reliance, as we know ourselves. So in that context, building of African self-reliance is an important dimension of the Gandhinagar Declaration. This self-reliance in Africa is done by not only transfer of equipment and by mutual trade, but also by training of personnel and higher command. So I see this whole exercise as well grounded in a comprehensive manner, because training of persons, military personnel at a higher level, brings a familiarity, between the two countries, and they get to know each other at a high level, and they carry memories of their association with India and the respect that India gives them and the affection which is there for Africa. So, and they participate, and then another dimension is the UN peacekeeping, for instance. In UN peacekeeping, India's record has been one of the largest contributors, and Africa is very much involved with the UN peacekeeping. So the association of our defense services with their counterparts in Africa through the UN peacekeeping multidimensional competence in the area of defense. And that also spurs their interest in India's own defense industry. We are building a self-reliance ourselves. And as Prime Minister said, that he's very proud of the confidence of our defense personnel in a self-reliant India. So this is a kind of a philosophy and grounding, which also spurs cooperation.
Mr. Samar, thank you so very much for a detailed overview of India-Africa defense cooperation in the context of the India and Africa defense dialogue that took place 2 days back in Gandhinagar. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Gandhinagar Declaration, Outcome of India-Africa Defence Dialogue. The participants were Shilkant Sharma, former diplomat, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.